Welcome back, everyone. We're joined now by Rachel Davis and Caroline Royal from Oregon Health and Science University, and they're going to present to us today on location, which was their setup of a new storage location ID system and what they learned from that. So, Caroline and Rachel, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, so hi and welcome to our presentation on the adventures of turning a former library into a true storage facility. As Leslie mentioned, I'm Rachel Davis and my co-presenter is Caroline Royal, and we work in the collections department at Oregon Health and Science University. Um, so we hope that you'll be able to glean some ideas from this presentation about how to use our storage location ID system in your own library by learning what it takes to implement such a project and the cleanup you can expect once the IDs are in place. So we have a great presentation for you on this last day. And yes, that is the storage warehouse from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And that's kind of what it felt like when I got there so many years ago. So we're just gonna dive right on in. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to be taking you through the project history and how it was designed and carried out. And then my colleague Caroline is going to talk to you about cleaning up after the project, next steps, and then share some key takeaways. Next slide, please. So before we dive into the technical aspects and how the project was implemented, it's important to know the history of how the old library got into the shape it was and why creating such a system was necessary. Next. So in 1991, construction is completed for the Biomedical Information Communication Center, or the BIC, which the new library lives in, which provides audiovisual, library, and teleconference services, public computer services, and health informatics. So this led to the closure of the old library building to the public, and it was converted into a storage facility for old journals and books. And it was easier to just keep the majority of the collection at old and just start housing more recent years of materials at the new main library. So the location codes at the old library would be based on publication date for both books and journals. Next. So things started getting complicated whenever materials got moved around. This led to journals that were mostly shelved in title order, having many exceptions that made it confusing. And as journals aged into the library, they wouldn't always fit in with their title run. So they had to put in random spots. It also started getting really confusing when we would lose rooms at the old library as it started its conversion to a shared space, and materials just had to be moved to new random spots where they would fit. Next, please. So here's a list of the old library location codes that I was referring to earlier. So as you can see, there was a lot of duplication, a lot of confusing location, and codes just not being deleted um, when they were no longer in use. So another big issue was that institutional knowledge was superseded by what was in the ILS. So if a book needed to go in one place, but the system said something different, it wasn't always corrected, but instead just kind of relied upon that it's supposed to go here, school of thought. Next, please. So there were several attempts to rectify the confusing nature of the old library shelving scheme. Signs were created to try to more clearly explain to the pager the many intricacies and exceptions at the old library. This one that you see is pretty simple, but it really only showed the highest levels of where things were located, and it didn't break it down by title or call number. Next, please. Some more attempts were made to break down the old library shelving scheme into a flow chart for better clarity. So as you can see, we're starting to get room numbers and titles and like just high level call numbers. Next, please. So that flow chart that you just saw was converted into a table when things started moving around more, and things got more complicated in terms of location. Next, please. And then this is the final one that was created by a student worker, and she created this massive flow chart. So it really broke down, and then you can kind of just see the intricacies of where everything went and where it was supposed to go. And so that is kind of like one of the reasons why things would get lost over there. Next slide, please. So that was all before I got there. So how I added my little bit to the chaos was when I started at OHSU. Fire suppression system was being installed in the old library, and all of the top level shelves had to be emptied. And we needed to shift these items quickly. So as you can see, we had to create quite a bit of clearance for the sprinkler system. So the way I shifted was I used a two-piece of tape system that I brought over from the Gwyn Library at OSU, where you identify the start of the new shelving order with one piece of tape, and then use another piece of tape at the start of the current shelving order. And then it's simply you just match up the numbers. And it's so simple that literally anyone can jump in to help because you're just matching up numbers. Next, please. So now that you have a good base about how the old library got to the state it was in, I'd like to take you through how I started thinking about converting the old library into a storage facility and the steps it took to enable such a large project. Next, please. So, to get this project off the ground, I had to create a spark of interest in the right people and then explain to them the benefits and the beginnings of how a numbering system could be of use in such a facility. So, I also had to emphasize the importance of creating such a system because it would inventory the entire building. And then we would have tons of data to be able to clean up the collection after. It would even be able to find items that were not transferred over during the migration. So all of those hidden items that you don't know are on the shelf would be there. You would be able to find them and add them back in. Next, please. So I was able to quickly propose an idea that was based off of a numbering system at a storage facility at a different previous job. So the items at our library would be given a 5-digit code based on the floor, aisle, column, shelf, and sequence. So it was exciting because items could literally be put anywhere and still be findable. Accessioning items into the library would go so much faster because you could put the items where they fit and not have to worry anymore on the any room on the shelf where it should go. Like there was no more should go. It's just where can it go? Give it a number. So once we scanned everything, we would know what was in old, would finally have an inventory of that space. Next, please. So as you can imagine, carrying out a project this big and complex takes some buy-in since many different departments need to be brought in and it would cost money to do. So I started with a feasibility meeting with my supervisor and our systems person at the time to see if this was even possible to do. After we decided this was possible, I brought it before the department heads and explained the cost and benefits of the project to them. So once we got approval, we started creating a foldering system and developed an API code to get the numbers into the item records in the backend. Next, please. So this is the foldering system that Kyle Banerjee, the systems person I mentioned earlier, came up with. It's basically a list of barcodes in a text document inside of a folder inside of a folder, inside of a folder. So the folders are named based on the floor, column, and row, and then the text document represents the shelf, and then the last digit is recorded on the text document that represents the item's place on the shelf. So the API basically takes the foldering system, breaks it down into the storage location ID numbers, and then puts those numbers into the storage location ID field in the item records. So it's really slick. Next, please. So once the API got all the storage location IDs into the item records, we needed to get them printing correctly on the paging slips. So at first we only added them uh, to the storage location ID field in the item record, and we could not get it to print correctly on the paging slip. We tried all these different ways and it just was not showing up. So what we had to do to keep the project going was we actually added it to the description field. If something was already in the description field, we put a slash after the data and then just appended it to the end, and then we put that number there. We didn't worry about this because we knew we could back this out of the description field once we got the paging slips working. So it was really just a quick and dirty way to get the storage location IDs printing. Next slide, please. And yes, a special thanks to Lori Hilterbrand, our very own RSF program manager. So she was able to actually troubleshoot and identify the XML, that the XML name code did not match the name of the storage location ID field. And so once we learned that it was called something else in the XML, we were able to toggle the correct radio buttons in the configuration field, and then back the storage location IDs out of the description fields. And then we got it printing on the storage slips and it was beautiful. It was really nice to have that. It was so satisfying. Next, please. So things were really good for about 4 months. We hired a temp to start scanning. We worked out the kinks as they came up. We got into a really good groove. And then, next, please. Yep, you know what happened. So we got locked down. Next, please. So, yes, we were actually really lucky when COVID hit. We had a good 2 floors scanned before we were sent home, but unfortunately, we had to let our temp worker go in March 2020. It took a lot of planning to get the project restarted in COVID conditions. The good news is that we were actually able to restart the project because we had gotten so far and it was just easier to finish it than to just stop. But it took a lot of remembering and a bit of redesigning because we had stopped for so long. When we were finally able to restart, it was a little over 2 years later. We had also lost our systems person, so I had to work with a new person who basically had to relearn how to do the API work and did a lot of restructuring himself, kind of rewriting it to work. Once we had that worked out, we wanted to finish quickly because we didn't know if or when we would get shut down again. So we hired 2 people to scan and we were able to finish up pretty quickly. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's the history of the project. So now I'm going to hand you over to Caroline, who was able to really take the cleanup phase of the project and run with it.
Thanks, Rachel. I learned so much about this project just through preparing this presentation. So much work went into it before I got there, which was December last year. And I knew this project was coming, and I had worked on a big stacks maintenance project like this at my previous job. So I was very excited to get started on the cleanup here. Next slide. So our starting point, when I started at OHSU, I found the library in transition. There was an ever increasing use of electronic resources. The physical collection had become largely outdated. Stacks were at capacity. The Alma ILS was not being used to its full potential, and catalog maintenance and sort of Alma internal documentation of collections decisions had not been prioritized. And then finally, there'd been a lot of changes in staffing with retirements, hiring, and promotions, new jobs for people. Next. But there were some things that made this project a little bit easier. And those were the fact that all the journals were itemized and barcoded, which is huge. The storage location IDs were all in place. And there was current staff with historical knowledge. So that was really helpful because you can imagine seeing those flow charts, how difficult it was to find your way around there. And the other thing is the error logs that Rachel mentioned. Those listed barcodes not found in Alma. So that was going to be a useful tool. Next. This is my somewhat larger list of complicating factors. And some of these Rachel has already mentioned. So journals were shelved by date range and then by title. So that meant journal runs were kind of spread out throughout the building. The holdings records largely had no summary holdings, and almost none of them had any shelving notes where there were exceptions to the title shelving order. Monographs were shelved by call number, but because of the historical events that Rachel has described, there were A to Z call number runs on multiple floors of the building. And so it's great if staff has historical knowledge, but they also relied on that rather than on the catalog. So there was a little bit of letting people know that the catalog was going to become more reliable. There'd be no student workers to help with cleanup, and there were some really simple facilities issues, like in one particular floor, out of 20 or 25 light bulbs, only 4 or 5 of them worked. So putting in a few facilities requests helped a lot. Next. Okay, so before I could get started on the cleanup, I have a couple preliminary steps. And one of them is we needed to fix the Alma locations and update them based on their storage location ID. Most journals were in a general Alma location of old library journals, which I think is fine if you have a kind of a consistent A to Z run. But because our journals were broken up by date range, it wasn't very helpful. And for monographs, as you can see in this graphic, the actual physical location of them in the building was not at all reflected in their Alma location name. Next. So using jobs, we moved about 56,000 physical items into different locations to match the first digit of their storage location ID. I worked with Access Services on this. And already some cleanup surfaced where we saw a number of items that had been transferred to old still had a main stacks location. So they had storage location IDs, and that's how we knew where they were. So we could clean those up very quickly.
I think you cut out.
Oh, I cut out. Let's see. What was the last part I said? Well, anyway, yeah, we found some problems already in this little portion of the project. Next. Then the second thing that I did was create a dashboard that was accessible to everyone who was working or might want to work on this project. Not a really pretty one like you see sometimes, but very functional. And there were 3 sections in my dashboard. The first section is just a list of Alma locations at the old library. And if you remember Rachel's list, this one is greatly reduced. And you can see there are a few locations that just have a handful of items in them. Those are eventually going to go away when cleanup is finished. Next. So this is the main report on that dashboard, and this is just a list of items that have an old Alma location, old library location, but no storage ID. And anyone who wants to do some searching can download this report or access it in analytics and kind of slice and dice it a little bit more. We can also monitor the total, which is already outdated here in this slide. We're down about 100 more, so about 630. Next. And then the last section of my dashboard is kind of left over from cleaning up the ALMA locations. These are the reports that I used to find where the first digit of the storage location ID didn't match the ALMA location name. And so as we update, when we find items, add their storage location ID, if we forget or don't want to change the ALMA location, it'll just pop up in these reports. And if there are enough, we can do it in batch. If they're just a couple, you can change them manually. Next. Okay, so now on to the cleanup. And if you think about problems when you're reconciling a catalog and shelves, there are like two basic scenarios, and one would be items that are in ALMA, but they're not on the shelf. And the other is items that are on the shelf, but they're not in ALMA. So I'm going to talk about those two batches separately. And so first, to the items that are in ALMA, but they had no storage location ID. When I started on the cleanup, there were 6,500 items without slids. And we took a look to see if we could find some batches of items. And this is what we found. There were some items that were not scanned because they were cleared for weeding in a Excel spreadsheet somewhere that I didn't know about, but then I found. And so we completed that weeding and removed those items from the shelf. There were items that were not scanned because they were slated to be next for weeding. And so I entered kind of a dummy storage ID so that we could just clear them from my set. And then there were items that had been weeded, but they were still in the catalog. So after quite a bit of research, we were able to figure out which titles were in that scenario, and we deleted those from ALMA. And then the last area is a little bit pandemic related. There were a lot of items, over 1,000 items that were in missing or lost. And I think this list hadn't been handled in a long time due to the pandemic. So we processed that list and got those off the set. And then after removing those 4 batches, there were about 3,000 items left without storage location IDs. Next. So unfortunately, this part then really required a lot of manual work. I got to know the old library very well through this, so that's a bonus. But the typical issues that I found were enclosures. That's probably a problem everywhere. So there'd be one barcode on the actual item and another on the enclosure, and ALMA had not been updated with the new barcode. Sometimes there were duplicate barcodes on items. So let's say one on the back paste down and another one on the back flyleaf. Sometimes there were duplicate item records. So those could just be deleted. Occasionally, I found a shelf or two that was not scanned. And that was always like a little, just a fun scenario where I could knock out 100 of them all at once. Occasionally, the barcodes had not scanned correctly due to the scanner itself, not the person scanning. So those showed up on that log, the error log. Sometimes the ALMA physical location was not correct. The last category is sometimes items were found on people's desks, on shelves, all over the place. So once I realized one of those, then we kind of searched all the offices and desks and tried to gather those up. And I want to say it was very fruitful to work on the journals. I found probably at least 75% of them. Next. The monographs were a different situation, but we did find some. And those were mostly very thin books that just got missed in the scanning. And pretty much the rest of the scenarios are the same with the journals. The ALMA location was incorrect. They were found on desks. There were scanning errors from the scanner. And then the theses, which was the one area that I found a lot of things, these had kind of the enclosure issue because there'd been a big digitization project. So a lot of theses were disbound, and scanned for digitization, put in an envelope with a new barcode, but that barcode wasn't entered into ALMA. So I'm going to talk about the error files next in connection with those theses. But just a final note is that we really found very few monographs, unfortunately. There's still, a few hundred, but I don't have a lot of hope for those. Next. Okay, and so the other situation, the items are on the shelf, but they're not in ALMA. And so with journals, some volumes or issues were not itemized. And what happened to those during scanning is a few were left on the shelf and flagged, but most of them were set aside in a particular shelving area. You can see a couple sections here of those. And I did find a cart of them too. And because these didn't have barcodes, none of them were accounted for when the storage location IDs were assigned. And I am currently adding these back into the catalog if they're connected to current OHSU holdings. And I guess one other note that's a little bit connected to what Rachel said about things don't have to be in their logical order anymore. We just assigned a couple of shelves because sometimes, most of the time, you can't stick them back where you would want them to go in their run. And so we just have a couple shelves reserved for things we're adding back into the catalog and can't get into the correct place on the shelf. Next. Monographs, a little bit similar, but a lot of these, so some monographs without barcodes were left in place and flagged, and these did not get storage location IDs because they couldn't be scanned. But there were a lot of monographs that did have barcodes and they did get scanned, but there was no record found in ALMA. And so now I'm going to talk about the error logs that helped with those. Next. So this is a little screenshot of like a output file from the storage location ID assigning program. And in it, you can see that what barcode got updated with what storage location ID. And then you see there's one barcode is bad and logging it to this file. Next. And if you take a look at that, you'll notice that a spot was assigned for it. So the program knew it was on the shelf because there was a barcode. So it has spot 9 right there in between 8 and 10. And then before my arrival, Rachel and the student workers had made a spreadsheet of just the bad ones. So we didn't need to go through the error logs anymore. And you can see the barcode and its spot on the shelf. And then if you look at the bottom graphic, you can see, if you look in ALMA and look it up, I think maybe part of that slide is a little bit cut off, but you can see that volume 8 and volume 10 are there, volume 9 is missing, and there's a little blank spot for it to be assigned to position 9 if we can find it. Next. Okay, so the bad barcode logs were also very useful for theses because all of our theses were stored in 2 or 3 call number ranges together. It was very easy to take my list of items with no storage ID, reduce it to just these call number ranges, and then go to the shelf and use the cutter to find the thesis. And you could do a lot of these really fast. And so I would just take the barcode from the error log, search it in ALMA, and then, the barcode from the no slid list, search it in ALMA, and when I found it, just update it with the barcode and the storage location ID from that error file. Next. Another tool that was really useful was a little dashboard widget that I made. If you have a prompt in your analytics report, you can't add that as an ALMA home screen widget. You have to make a separate dashboard for it. So I made a dashboard for this little prompt. And so in ALMA, you can look up items that are active, but what if the item is deleted? then you have to go into analytics and make a new report. So I made a little doodad here, a little widget where you can look up something by OCLC number or by barcode, or you can enter a few consecutive words from the title. It's case sensitive, so I don't like that one very much. And so if you look at the top file, that's the green box. If you look at the top picture, you can see this one item highlighted in orange. Before it, we see volume 75, and after it, we see volume 48, and then it's kind of all by itself with volume 68. So I wanted, in this case, I would want to see, that's strange. What happened to everything that surrounds it? And so if I grab the OCLC number from this bib and enter it into the field there in my widget, the bottom file is what pops up. And then you can see, okay, everything around that has all been deleted. So it seems really clear that this was just kind of a forgotten item, and I can delete that from the catalog. Next. Also, there's a cloud app that can help with the items. It's called the item storage locator. And this can help probably in a variety of ways. But for me, you could enter a barcode and then you can check what the storage location ID is, or you can set a storage location ID. So anyway, I use this some. We're developing kind of an in-house program that's going to take this idea, but kind of expand it so that once you set a, let's say you have a shelf with 10 books and you want to remove book 5, or you want to add a book after 5, this program will adjust everything that comes after the thing you just changed. Next. Okay, so that is the cleanup in a nutshell. And next I'm going to talk about next steps and takeaways. Next. So we're currently cataloging the journal volumes that I showed you and adding them back into the collection. After that, we'll do a final search for any journal volumes we haven't found, and we'll delete them from ALMA if we can't find them. The remaining monographs on that list of no slid items is being searched for by Access Services. We are finalizing weeding guidelines because that is the goal of all of this. Once the inventory is done, is to be able to weed. And then we're going to start weeding, and we've actually currently already started on some weeding in that area where I entered the dummy storage IDs. And we still need to make some decisions about the monographs that we found on the shelf that weren't in ALMA. Do we want to add them back into the collection? Do we want to say good riddance? Or we have to take a look and see what's there first. Next. Yeah, so this presentation has been full of trees, but here's a little zoom out to the forest. What has this project taken? It's taken a lot of collaboration between collections, access services, and systems. It's taken a buy-in from library administration. And one thing I didn't put on this list, but I think is also important is you kind of, it's great to have a person who can champion the project. So, Rachel was a believer in assigning the storage location IDs. I'm a believer in cleaning up, and we were really able to retain motivation when things get difficult. You want to devise a flexible and functional storage location ID system and complete as much catalog cleanup as possible beforehand. You want to think about the particularities of the collection and the needs of your library, and then kind of related to that, what scenarios might you encounter while you're scanning, and how will the storage location IDs affect the day-to-day workflow of staff? And one final note is to not underestimate the amount of cleanup work necessary, because in both the projects that I've worked on, there's been a lot. Next. Okay, but the good thing is that now the library is in a much better position to do so many things. We can find collection materials more easily and successfully. We can weed the collection, we can shift for a better flow, and we can respond to sudden changes in space needs in an orderly fashion. We can carry out newly established sound catalog maintenance practices, and we can also move from tracking with external documents to tracking decisions and information inside of Alma and analytics. Next. And thank you. And we also want to thank a few people too who have really helped us, worked on the project, helped us remember details about the project. Kyle Banerjee, Rachel's already mentioned, and Paul Garner, who's the Access Services Manager at OHSU, Lori Hildebrand for the paging slips, and the current systems person who's helping us with the API and everything, Nick Peterson. And that's what we have for you.
Yeah, so just let us know if you have any questions. I also have some prompting questions for you just in case to kind of break the ice.
And remember that you can chat your question in through the chat, or you can unmute and ask your question verbally if you prefer.
All right, we'll get us started. So we're just wondering, so can people see this work in what they are doing? So just, can you envision that the storage location ID has any kind of like relevance in your place, or could you use a system like that? Has anyone encountered similar areas where you don't know what is in there? Or does anyone who's listening have a storage location ID? And what are you using? Like what's your storage system and how did you get it into the item records? Do you want to take that one, Caroline? So
Yeah, I
Rachel,
can.
yeah, go ahead.
I saw it pop up.
Yeah.
That's a really good question, and that's something that that we've been thinking about, because that's kind of the final barrier to the weeding. If you start taking books off the shelf, then that last digit no longer is correct. So this is kind of why we asked the systems developer to come up with this utility or this tool where if we let's say we take a book off the shelf, we would somehow tell Alma. So I don't want to get into the details of how the project is going to work, but basically it'll be kind of an input to say we've removed this book from the shelf, and then what it'll spit out is these are all the expected books that are coming after that one you want to take off. Should we adjust the storage location ID? And you can confirm, because you can see the titles. Yes, that's what's on the shelf. And then the program will just automatically update all of those, basically the sequence on the shelf in the storage location ID. And he did mention, so this is in development. He did mention that once it's finished, he plans to put that up on the GitHub site.
Does anyone here have storage facilities at their library that they use? Might be the only ones with a storage library.
Everybody's
Oh,
verified.
storage in our basement. Oh,
I know from the Alliance perspective, this is Leslie. I know there's been conversations recently about maybe looking back into setting up a shared storage facility for Alliance members. And this definitely piques my interest because it's like, yes, we would need a system like storage location IDs because we have any number of candidate collections that could go into that facility. And it's not a browsing facility, right?
no, not at all.
It's
No, this is
meant
not a
for
browsing.
right. So that kind of like, the library, the traditional library part of me is like, but things aren't in order. And
But it doesn't matter.
but it
That's
doesn't
what,
matter.
yeah, that's the beautiful part of the system. It's
Mhm,
just like you can just, and especially if it's, not browsable, it can just go anywhere and just give it a number and you're good to go. And
mhm.
so, yeah, it's nice to be able to implement these kind of projects. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun to work on.
Mhm. I'm seeing a comment in chat from Willamette about they do have some storage, but the process was much more straightforward. They moved their bound periodicals to a nearby facility. And they just did a location change. And then
I
there
would
is a
imagine
question.
though that, oh, sorry.
Mhm. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would imagine that there was some catalog cleanup after that. Is that true? In any case, I see the question about analytics
Mhm.
reports. I created my own analytics reports, and I use them all the time for this project. And so, like any kind of cleanup, those reports are really essential.
I think a question that's popped into my head to ask is, have you found that post project or at least late project, is any project ever fully done? Um, do you find that library staff trust the catalog more? Is there like an increased sense of belief that what Alma tells you is true about where to find things?
I would say, yeah, Caroline.
Sorry, I was reading a chat that came in. Could you repeat, Leslie? I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. Have you found that like the staff at OHSU and the library have more trust and kind of faith in the Alma system to tell them accurately where to find things?
I think people are slowly trusting the catalog in general. Um, it's always kind of interesting working with people from other departments, especially if this is like a collections led project. But access services, for example, might have a part like the training can be kind of a tiny bit awkward, or like checking up to make sure things were done in the way that you would want them to be done. So I think they are relying more and more on the catalog, and I know they're using the storage location IDs, um, but I don't have any like direct feedback from them that
I
um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so a little more background. So I started this project when I was in access services. And then when I moved to the collections department, part of that move was being able to take my project with me because I was just like, if I move to the collections department, I want to finish this because it was like halfway done and I was like, I need to finish. So I was really able to kind of work with access services a little more intimately, and um, we were able to just kind of work together. but I feel that at least when I was there working with them, everybody was so excited for the storage location IDs because it really made stuff visible that was hidden for so long. And they did have a lot of hesitation at first because they're like, well, this journal's out of order. I really want to put, 10 or 9, they were transposed and they really wanted to put them back together. And I was like, but it's okay because that's its numbering system. Like that it is stuck now. So and it was really kind of like reworking them to understand that it is a storage facility now. It does not matter that things are out of order as long as they're findable. So I think it's really taken some time to kind of get everybody out of that mentality of like this is where it's supposed to go. But everybody's been coming around and everybody's really happy that the numbering system is there because it was just chaos for so long.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate, yeah, it's very hard. Like I can feel myself, like my own like preconceptions like bugging me. So I imagine you have a lot of buy-in is very important
Oh, buy-in's so important. Yeah,
and
and
just
yeah.
reiterating. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, we do have a couple more. Oh, wait, one more.
Mhm.
Just to mention the API item storage locator. Did you run into any issues using the tool? Yeah. So when Kyle first created the tool, there was a lot of like sometimes. So I would give him a zip file, and then he would unzip the file. But sometimes he would forget to remove one of the number of the zip file, and so it would be like 6 digits instead of 5 digits. And so and that's like where the slide where it was like do testing, work out kinks, then scan some more. So it was really like um we would add stuff, I would find errors, and because he was using the API, he would be able to just back everything out and then correct his error and then add everything back in. And then when Nick took over after Kyle left, Nick kind of had to rewrite Kyle's code a little bit to get it working for what we wanted. Kind of like he found some ways to tweak it so that way it worked a little more seamlessly. And so like 2 floors were Kyle's API, and then the rest of the library was Nick's API. It did take a little bit of working with Nick to get the API working the way we wanted to again, just because the way it was left, it just didn't make sense. And so we had to like he had to rewrite it and then do some more testing. So it was a big jump to get this going once we came back from the pandemic and we were able to like get back into the library. So we got there.
I just want to echo the comment in chat. I'm impressed. I'm totally absolutely impressed. Not only is this a massive project, but you had those interruptions, right? You had the
Mhm.
COVID interruption, you had, your developer leave in the middle of the project and had to hand that off to someone new. I'm astonished. I just this is amazing. I also
And
kind of
I want
feel
to,
feel a little envious. It's like I want a project like that to work on.
yeah, as a new person coming into that library, it was amazing having those storage location IDs because there are 4 floors and multiple areas in each floor. And anyway, I don't know how I would have ever gotten used to it without those IDs. So very helpful to new people.
We still have time for questions, so if you have a question or a comment you'd like to drop into chat or unmute and ask verbally, please do. All right, things look pretty quiet. Um, I want to say another thank you to Rachel and to Caroline for teaching us all about this project and all the ins and outs that you experienced. It's really impressive. Thank you so much for putting this presentation together and sharing it with us.
Thanks.
Thanks.